Hello everyone, welcome back to my second video. Before we get started, I would like to address a couple of things. First off, I want to let you know that I am working on improving the quality of the audio with these videos. Until then, I appreciate you hanging in there. Second, in my first video, I did not talk about what I do as a career. I am a trauma therapist. I work with folks who have been a victim of crime, like domestic violence, sexual assault, and child abuse. So most of my videos will likely include things I know from doing this work. So for this video and probably the next couple of videos, I want to talk about a few different things I look for when I'm confronted with current issues. For this video, I will be talking about a concept I teach clients. There are several terms for this concept, such as cognitive distortion, unhelpful thinking, thinking errors, and thinking traps. When I am working with clients, I teach this concept as a way to help clients understand how their unhelpful thoughts impact how they move through the world, how they interpret things that go on around them. We look at how it impacts their quality of life and future relationships. I have noticed that much of the tension and disagreements I see when reading articles, posts, and observing conversations can be attributed to these thinking traps. As I go through these different types of traps, I will not only discuss how I present them to clients, but also how I apply it to the things I observe happening around me. Then I will pull it all together and focus on the ones that seem to create the most discord. As we go through these, you'll notice that sometimes one is very much like the others, or that it is possible to engage in more than one at a time. My goal is to teach them in general, and for you to be able to recognize thinking traps for what they are and how they affect your interpretation of events and your interactions with others. The first thinking trap we will talk about is maximizing and minimizing. The most common definition of this thinking trap is making the importance of events more or less than it actually is, or blowing things out of proportion, or denying a problem exists when it does. In sessions, clients typically struggle with this when they have a hard time believing their own achievements. Like they might say, it was not a big deal. Or that their mistakes are excessively more important than what they really are. For example, they might say, I am stupid because I missed that one question. Or they might say, something must be wrong with me because I burned his dinner. In current events, I see news stories that maximize certain aspects of a story and minimize other parts, oftentimes in order to sensationalize their piece. We are then left to decipher what is important or relevant from distorted information. Catastrophizing is related to maximizing and minimizing. It is seeing only the worst possible outcomes. A typical example would be when a student does not get the grade he or she is trying to achieve, so they might say to themselves, if I fail this test, I will never get into the school I want. With the state of the world, everything feels like a catastrophe, or one that is waiting to happen. I think the most common example of what I see is statements like, if so-and-so gets elected, that is the end of America. Overgeneralization is another type of thinking trap. It is making a broad interpretation from a single or small number of experiences. In other words, this person may have had a few bad experiences, therefore that is how all those experiences will be. For example, my clients who are leaving a domestic violence relationship may say, I will never meet someone who will treat me right. Then I have a conversation with them that goes like this. So I might ask, how many relationships have you had? My client might say, well, 2, and they were both awful. Well, then I would say, so you've been in relationships with 2 people? They might respond, yes. And how many potential relationships are out there, I would ask. Well, I guess a lot. Then I would ask, can you give that a number? And they would likely answer, well, no, there's too many to count. So then I respond, okay, so what you're telling me is that based on your experience of being in a relationship with 2 people, they represent all people that might be a possible relationship. And the answer is usually no. Of course, there is a lot more to that conversation, but that really doesn't relate here. So let's take this concept and look at how things are in current events. Can you think of situations in which someone has pointed out that an entire group is bad because of the actions of a few? I can. Liberals do it to conservatives, and conservatives do it to liberals. It shows up in the issues of race, and likely there are many other examples right now. Too many to cover here. It is the actions of a few being attributed to the many. Another thinking trap is jumping to conclusions. This is interpreting the meaning of something with little or no evidence. It can include making decisions prematurely without enough to go on. With clients, I often see this when they don't reach out for help because they jump to the conclusion that no one will or can help them. One of the most disturbing evidences of jumping to conclusions and its impact on most everything we are experiencing right now, especially as a nation, can be seen in the recent deaths of people of color, especially those involving law enforcement. People from all walks of life and political affiliations jumped to conclusions before there were even facts presented. Most everyone seemed to have all the answers and were promoting their opinions, though they were just jumping to conclusions. Another example is the situation in which the young man in Kenosha shot and killed 2 people and wounded 1 other. Initially, only little bits of pieces of information were known, and suddenly everyone knew exactly what happened and had him convicted in the court of opinion. And even now, as more information has been released, folks are so caught up in their versions of what happened, they cannot adjust their conclusions that they have jumped to. So there are a couple of ways a person can jump to conclusions. One is mind reading. This involves interpreting the thoughts and beliefs of another person without adequate evidence. It's believing you know what someone else is thinking, that you can read their mind. When I am working with clients, I often hear, I can't talk to that person because they think I am stupid. I have to ask them, how do you know that is what they think? The response is often based on their own views of themselves, but also how the other person is behaving. I typically then help them reframe the thought to something like, I feel I am stupid because this person is treating me this way, but that does not mean it is true. When I'm reading posts that are along the lines of, this person hates all, fill in the blank, because they do X, Y, and Z. Unless we can read a person's mind, we cannot know what he or she is thinking. We would be jumping to conclusions based on the actions of that person. It does not mean the conclusion is wrong, but it could be. The other way a person can jump to conclusions is what is called fortune telling. It is the expectation that a situation will turn out a certain way without enough evidence. A client might say to me, they will turn me down for this assistance, so why bother trying? And of course, I ask, how do you know? Sure, sometimes they do have enough information to come to that conclusion, but often they are jumping to conclusions. I think the most common fortune-telling examples I see outside of sessions are statements like, if so-and-so is elected, our economy will crash. I think one of the hardest thinking traps to address is called emotional reasoning. Emotions are a powerful influence and often misguiding way of determining facts from fiction. I can produce a long list of examples of what this would look like in sessions, but what it really boils down to is, I feel like a failure, I must be a failure. I hear and read so many comments on current events that go along the lines, or at least have the equivalent general meaning of, I feel like this happened, so it must have happened. We often refer to it as our gut instinct, and in a pinch, it can keep us safe. But if we apply this to taking in new information or making decisions that can affect others, it can be harmful. Like feeling that someone is against you and then acting on that feeling, even to the point of causing that other person injury. Should statements are thinking traps that I particularly find difficult to teach clients. Often we spend years applying should statements to ourselves, and so they are very ingrained. These are the beliefs that things should be a certain way. Should statements are often judgmental and unforgiving, not allowing for nuances and exceptions. In sessions, I hear, "I should have known better," implying that they could have changed someone else's behaviors based on their own knowledge. What can be difficult is that there may be aspects that are true. Had they known better, maybe they themselves would have made a decision that would not have put themselves in a situation. But it does not change the actions were that of another person. They take the responsibilities off the offender. This is related to hindsight bias, which is another thinking trap that I won't be covering here specifically. I don't think there's anywhere I look or read that does not involve should type statements. You should believe this thing, or if you don't, something is wrong with you. All or nothing thinking is a type of trap that is easy to spot but difficult to change. This thinking trap involves thinking in absolutes. This thinking typically includes words like always, never, every, all, nothing. It is thinking that involves either or statements or innuendos. My clients often make statements like, "No one will ever love me," or "I will never be safe." Considering how vulnerable these folks are, and often considering their background, it is hard to challenge these thoughts. And we are surrounded by this kind of thinking trap. A lot of statements involving the either or thinking. You are either a Democrat or Republican, left or right, for us or against us. These are just some of the examples. The last thinking trap I will be including here is labeling. This is assigning global negative traits and stating them as facts. It is assuming a trait is the end-all be-all of an individual. It is disregarding that traits are often on a scale, for example, a little bit or a lot, and is not the only trait an individual displays or has. In other words, no one is the only one thing. Some types of words that I may hear working with clients that fit into this type of trap are words like lazy, stupid, loser, jerk. When I am following social media, news media, and other information mediums, common words that I see are evil, racist, bigot, fascist, moron, snowflake, etc. Labeling is name calling. It is a judgment placed based on limited information, discounting the complicated nature of a person's whole being. While all of these traps that I have covered here can be seen in many of the contentious interactions about current affairs, there are three that I see as most relevant and most harmful to productive conversation: all or nothing thinking, mind reading, and labeling. All or nothing does not allow for differences among people. It devalues the experiences of others and does not allow for people to make changes. This limits people's capacity to grow and does not allow for subtle and sometimes not so subtle differences. Mind reading assumes we know what others think and feel. We assign intent and motives when there is no way to really know what others think and feel without them telling us specifically or for us to read their minds. We then are less aware that we may need to reevaluate our responses. Labeling is probably the most damaging trap, especially when trying to resolve issues. There is nothing more confining and limiting when we slap a label on someone. While in certain circumstances applying labels give a common language to communicate to make change, for example like a diagnosis, it rarely is beneficial to the individual to have a label attached to them. The person engaging in the labeling is setting themselves up on a moral high ground and takes away from legitimate and real conversation as they widen the gap between themselves and the person they are labeling. The person being labeled is pushed into the narrow definition of that label. At worst, both individuals then dissolve into a back and forth name calling, and the message itself is quickly lost. So I challenge you. Start paying attention to thinking traps. Notice when you are getting caught in them and when others are operating from them. And pay attention to how it impacts you and how you react to the information. So that's it for this topic. Thank you for hanging in there. I have a few ideas for the next few videos. I am considering creating a video about assumptions, biases, and agendas. Another one about knowing sources, how do they know what they know, and one on the media, news, social, and television, etc., and how it affects our interpretations of events. Tell me what you think about those ideas. Also, if you have ideas that you would like to see in future videos, leave a comment below. And if you have not yet, hit that subscribe button. Thanks.